Ready? Dear Heavenly God, our most loving Creator, we thank you so much for this new Sabbath, this time of rest. We thank you for drawing us all here together. I take the importance of presenting this seriously, but I apologize for my lack. So I think it could have been better, but I pray, Lord, that through your Holy Spirit, you will fill us all, and that you will lead and guide and help everyone to understand the importance of the message and how it's been refined to be simple. So I pray that you will help everyone to understand how we get from the world wars to equality so that it can be explained to other people. It is very simple. I pray, Lord, that you will bless my lips, that you will help me to share with everyone the way it goes. I trust in you, Lord, to help everyone to see the truth that you're presenting. I pray, Lord, that you will help us all to love this truth, grasp onto the truth, and hate sin. May your will be done in our hearts and our minds as it is in heaven. And we pray all this in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus. Amen. Okay, let me share. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
We do.
Yes. Okay, great. Let me know if I, okay, so for some reason I've been acting like I've been on coffee lately. I don't know why. I'm not, but it's just like going like 100 miles an hour. And so if I start speeding up, just say something and I'll slow down. And like always, if there are any questions, please just say something and stop me, make me pause, and we'll answer your questions. So what can you see right now? Are you looking at this document that says repeating patterns and the nature of the King of the South?
Yes.
Sweet. Okay, great. And I will increase the size to 200. Is that does that need to be increased for anybody?
No, that's perfect. Actually, I think it looks great.
Great. Okay. All right. So starting off here, my presentation was going to be on the nature of the King of the South. It still is, but after watching it, I had to go back to number 1 called repeating patterns. And these are all from the class in Portugal, the School of the Prophets, done in March of 2020. And this study that we're doing tonight, The Nature of the King of the South, was built on the previous presentation, repeating patterns. And I really wish that I had understood that and taken the time to transcribe that presentation fully and presented that first. But God has his own way of doing things. And so what I have done is I have inserted excerpts, not the entire transcript, but excerpts from the repeating patterns presentation that hopefully fills in the blanks that we'll need to understand better the study on the nature of the King of the South. Okay, so that's where I'm going to start, is the previous presentation that she did in the School of the Prophets in Portugal, called Repeating Patterns. And like I said, I'm only doing excerpts, and it's not going to be exactly word for word because I had to, save time and get the message clear. Because because these are School of the Prophets, so he's doing a lot of back and forth talking to the students. And so you can't always hear the students. And so I try to summarize what she said to make sure that the message is clear. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to go to this part, the first part, repeating patterns, and these are excerpts from the repeating patterns presentation. And there's a link to it. Okay, so there has been a fundamental principle in this movement that God shows us the end from the beginning. We all know that, right? That it starts out where God shows us the end from the beginning. It is like the introduction to doing line upon line. So we have learned how the history of Christ and the history of the Millerites represents our history, because God declares the end from the beginning. And that goes to Isaiah 46:10, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times, the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. So, but we have taken another view of these texts, and now we would go back and look for the original intent, because we know the original intent is not saying that the Millerites' history will teach the 144,000. So verse 46:11 right here talks about the ravenous birds from the east. You know that the king of, so when you hear that, the ravenous birds of the east, you know that the king of the north is coming. So the context is not Millerite history, but still we understand the original principle that God declares the end from the beginning. So just to read, just to verify Isaiah 11, calling a ravenous bird from the east, the man that executeth my counsel from a far country. Yea, I have spoken it, I will also bring it to pass. I have purposed it, I will also do it. So that's about the king of the north coming. So let's keep Isaiah 10 in our minds, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times, the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. So now let's talk about the line of the priest. So any questions on that so far? That's all familiar with anybody? I mean, with everybody?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to open up the chat real quick because I want to make sure if I'm not really good at checking it, but just in case someone says something over there, I'm going to, okay. So now let's talk about the line of the priest. So we have these three groups, the priest, the Levites, and the Nethinims. And ours, the line of the priest, is the story of the first group, that of the priest or the disciples. This is the line of the priest right here, 9 board work. And it began in 1989 with the first waymark. The other waymarks are 2001, which has in the previous has been called 9/11. We have 2014, which is our midway, 2019, and 2021. Our understanding of the reform lines has been refined over the last number of years, particularly our understanding of 2014, Ezra 7:9. And from 2014, our understanding of the reform lines has become more and more refined, more simple. They have not gotten more complicated, but more simple. And we understand them now in simplistic terms, is that God's people are scattered and they are going to be gathered. And we know the text about how God does that, how God reaches out his right hand, takes the hold of his people. They're in captivity to Babylon, and God is going to draw them to himself. So this is the hand of God. This is God's hand taking hold of a group of people and pulling them out of captivity. Now, I couldn't remember exactly the text she was referring to, and she didn't say it out loud. So if anybody knows that, I could insert it, but I couldn't think of it and I couldn't find it. So it seems to fit that we have 5 primary waymarks, just as you would see 5 fingers on a hand. So 5 primary waymarks and 4 dispensations. So you've got 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1989, 2001, 2014, 2019, 2021. And these are the primary waymarks for for the priest line, and every reform line of reform. Not every line like an information line, but every reform line has 5 primary waymarks with the 4 dispensations, and every dispensation is the same. The dates for the waymarks may change, but the dispensations, the plowing, the early rain, the latter rain, and the harvest remain the same. And so it seems to fit that we have the 5 primary waymarks, just as you would see the 5 fingers on a hand, 5 primary waymarks and 4 dispensations. So the space in between the fingers are the plowing, the early rain, the latter rain, and the harvest. So the 5 primary waymarks are separated by 4 histories. You could say the 4 steps of the agricultural process, but we call them dispensations. Any questions? Comments?
Very clear.
Awesome, thanks. As the message was being refined, we come to 2018. So this is the dispensation of the latter rain, and it's the formalization of the message. And we all know that this is basically when Elder Tess, at the time, she was not yet the elder, but I'm going to refer to her with respect as Elder Tess. So as the message was being refined, this is when she started with the presentations on Acts 27, and she came out with the midnight cry. Okay, so that's a really important date for us, 2018. So it's the formalization of the message. It was the midnight cry. Many people think that the movement was in unity then, but it was not. What were we divided over? And we were divided over the 2 streams of information. This is important, or was important, it's still important. So she's trying to explain that this division, this isn't important. And so she wanted us to know that there was not unity here. So when this formalization happened, there was not unity. And I think it's important to note, because in you'll see later as we go through the cause and effect of each of the dispensations, that there isn't unity in this spot, which brings us will bring us to this part. She doesn't cover it here, but in the end we'll see that it affects us now, because we are in the formalization of this message, and we're going to see that we're not all of us in unity. So just keep that in mind. So that's why this is important. So there was not unity. There were subtle attacks on the message that began very early. They were not necessarily intentional attacks, but the authenticity of the message was being questioned. Elder Parmenter and Elder Tess knew exactly what was happening. Those people, they who were not accepting it, they were that were questioning it, they were rejecting the message, failing the test. Since they could not just, they as in Elder Tess, so here they is those who were questioning. And here they is in the elders. Oops. Since they, the elders, could not just step in front of a movement of people and state that FFA was failing the test, they had to, okay, like I said, so just FYI, this first part, I didn't finish it, and I was typing it up until like 5 minutes before class right now. I was like really far behind. If I make it, and according to some people I'm going to, we'll see. it's only going to be because of God, because I am not one of his best. So you'll see that there are a lot of mistakes in here that I need to fix. So since the elders could not just step in front of a movement of people and state that FFA was failing the test, they had to try. So they were trying from December to 2018 to demonstrate how strong the message was and the methodology behind it. So studies were developed to show how the attacks of FFA were incorrect. And some of these studies are the repeating pattern, the King of the North versus King of the South, and there was more, which I haven't written down yet. So here is a summary of the repeating pattern. So hopefully I got everything from the first presentation that will fill in the blanks. I apologize for my lack. This repeating pattern could fit in any one of the 4 dispensations. What we recognized were the waymarks of Boston, Concord, and Exeter. In every dispensation, but I think what she meant was like on every line. So she says in every dispensation, there is a message that is going to plow. There is a message that will come as the early rain, a message that will come as a latter rain, and there is a message that will harvest. So I think what she meant was like on every reform line, there is a message that is going to plow. There's a message that will come as the early rain. There's a message that will come as the latter rain, and there's a message that will harvest. But each experience is through a message, not a spiritualistic experience. And when this message comes, it arrives, it's unsealed, there's an increase of knowledge that is formalized, and then you are tested on that. So it can, so you can fit this pattern, so this whole pattern from the unsealing to the closed door, into every dispensation as a repeating pattern. So you can see, you can, like we've done this 1,000 times. And you can fit it into every single one of these. And we all know the dates, like this one is 1996. I think this is 1991, 2009, 2012, 2016, 2018, 2020, right now, yep, 2020, I think that might be 2021. And so you can fit that same pattern, the unsealing, the increase of knowledge, the formalization, the test, the closed door, the unsealing, the increase of knowledge, the formalization, the test, the closed door, into every single dispensation. And not just on the priest line, of course, that goes on every Millerite line, or on the Millerite line, sorry, the line of the Levites, the line of the Nethinims, the 144,000, in every single dispensation, this pattern fits in there. So for example, it could be placed in the plowing dispensation on the line of the priest. It can be placed in the plowing dispensation of the line of the Millerites. That's this. So in the plowing of the dispensation of the line of the priest is the 1989, 1991, 1996, 2001. The plowing for the dispensation of the Millerites is the 1798, 1818, 1833, 1840. It can be placed in the early rain and the latter rain dispensations of the line of the priest. So a waymark can be a closed door for one message right here, and then also an unsealing for another message. So that same waymark, so like say 2014, is a closed door for this dispensation, but an unsealing of a message for this dispensation. See, so the July 21st, this one right here, the July 21st, August 1st, August 15, October 22nd of 1844 is the story of the Midnight Cry in the Millerite history, where we take the names of these camp meetings, Boston, Concord, and Exeter, and apply them to the repeating pattern. Boston is the arrival of the message. That's where on July 21st, they started with the message about the second coming of, like, not the second coming. Yeah, that's what they thought. That's what they thought it was going to be, the purification of the earth, right? Which they thought was the second coming at that time. So that was the arrival of the message. And then Concord is the increase of knowledge. And then Exeter is the formalization. So we call the study Boston, Concord, Exeter, or the repeating pattern, because it doesn't just fit into the plowing or the latter rain, it fits into all of them. It is the pattern that God uses every time he introduces a message. Every time he introduces a message. So you could come to the harvest of the line of the 144,000. There is a close of probation. There is a death decree. There is the voice of God giving the time of his second coming. And then there is the second advent. In every dispensation, you find that pattern. This study was done in December of 2018. Any questions? Cool.
No, clear so far.
Awesome. God is good. So we understand that these waymarks have characteristics attached to them. What does concord mean? Concord means harmony, unity. There are people coming into unity, and you can mark that in 2016 and 2020. So these waymarks have specific characteristics, particularly when you come to the increase of knowledge and the formalization of the message, that the increase of knowledge or concord would relate to unity, which is why you would see a death decree. Now, when she said that, it kind of caught me off guard, because I wasn't thinking ahead, right? And when there's unity, I was thinking our unity, right, of the movement. But in this sense, it's the unity of the enemy, because you see all of the enemies in unity against God's people. Who do you see in unity in 2020? For the external, you can see them coming into unity through the impeachment process. When it came to the impeachment vote, every Republican in the Senate, except one, voted no. And we all know that that's, that's really hurt his career. It's probably hard. He probably wouldn't get voted in again for that one person. And then all of those people, the Republicans that, even if they voted no on it, any of them that have that were, even leaning sideways, were getting replaced or pushed out. So you can see the enemy is coming into unity, even though many of them hate each other. So the waymark of concord has the characteristic of unity between a group of people. The formalization, or Exeter, always has the characteristic of time, some sense of time attached to it. So in 1996, it was announced that we are in the time of the end. It is marking that the time of the end began, but it also is saying that the Sunday law is in your lifetime. It is a message based on time. 2012, maybe that says supposed to say in 2012. In 2012, if the formalization of the message, 2012 is, okay, that's where the problem is. 2012 is the formalization of a message, and it is about time. 2018 brings with it time. This is just one template, this right here. You can take it, plug it into any dispensation, and then overlay that message, overlay the message that was to do the work. Okay, so we're still this, we're going on to one message per dispensation. This is still part of the repeating pattern, but kind of a different, we're building up. We're kind of moving on a little bit of a different thread here. So this is the title, One Message Per Dispensation. So she's going to go into, now we're going past the, not past it, but we're not going to be talking exactly about the pattern, but we're going to be talking about the messages that came up because of this pattern, right? So what is the first message that God gives this movement in 1989? It was line upon line. And in the light of Isaiah 46:10, how do you think that this reform line, the line of the priest, will end? With what understanding? Line upon line. So I would suggest right from the beginning that if God declares the end from the beginning, and we want to know what we specifically need to understand in the history of our harvest, it is going to be line upon line, because our line began that way. So the first study was line upon line, and that began to open up in 1989. So right here, we've got the little lines to represent the study on line upon line. And then in 1996, Daniel 11 opens up. And it is Daniel 11, specifically verse 40, that points back to 1989 and says that there is this reform line here that begins in 1989, because Daniel 11:40 has part A and part B. The message starts innocently, line upon line, and is non-threatening. It does not require you to, she asked, does it require you to change your behavior? No, not until Daniel 11:40 to 45 is introduced. And now it is teaching you that you are in a new reform line, and that changes everything. Reform lines are non-threatening. Daniel 11:40 to 45 is threatening. It starts innocently and it develops into something that becomes dangerous, something that is derisive, something that requires a change of behavior. So that is the message that was introduced in the dispensation of the plowing. So I wasn't in the message at this time, and I don't know exactly if there was a falling away in the movement, because I don't think there was very many people in the movement, but we do know that the SDA church that was presented with this message of Daniel 11:40 rejected it. And so they were given that chance to accept it, and they didn't. Okay. And so that would be that. Say it.
Somebody might know the date on that, but I'm pretty sure it was in the next dispensation, like around 2003, when it was.
Oh, when they rejected that.
Yeah, but I know we see that the leadership has passed by at 9/11. So I don't know if anybody remembers that date, because a bunch of us watched those videos of where Elder Jeff went before all the Daniel 11 study with a whole bunch of pastors.
Mm-hmm.
You probably remember that because Pastor Dana was one of those pastors.
Yeah, I don't remember the date.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's like 2003 or something, which is interesting because we know that the test was at 2001 here. Okay, sorry, I just was noting that. Sorry.
No, that's a good point. Yeah. Let's see. So 11:40 to 45, it's introduced, and now it's teaching you that you are in a, okay, so wait, the message starts innocently, line upon line, which is non-threatening, and it does not require you to change your behavior. Not until Daniel 11:40 to 45 is introduced, and now it is teaching you that you are in a new reform line, and that changes everything. Reform lines are non-threatening. Daniel 11:40 to 45 is threatening, and it starts innocently and develops into something that becomes dangerous, something that is divisive, something that will require a change of behavior. So that is the message that was introduced in the dispensation of the plowing. So Elder Jeff at that time had to realize that he was in a new reform line, and everybody else who was in the message at that time, I'm pretty sure Elder Parmenter was, right? And so
He became
He-
a Seventh-day Adventist in 1989,
1989. So was he?
but he
in the
wasn't
mov-
part of the movement.
Was he in the
became a-
movement in 1996?
Maybe somebody remembers the date, but I think it was after that.
Okay.
He was, well, they marked this, the arrival of Second Angel at 2001, but maybe somebody remembers the date for Elder Parmenter.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so she didn't answer all those, so I don't know if there was a split, but it would have required a change of behavior. Okay, and so that's what makes it dangerous. The reason I want us to think about that is because sometimes we tend to cut up our messages. We don't see how they are connected. And those, when we cannot see. Okay, something's wrong with the sentence, but we don't see how that they are connected. Okay, I don't know how this fits in there. Sorry about that. So there are not two messages introduced in the plowing. It is not one message of line upon line and another of Daniel 11. They are one message. It is just that God is going to introduce a catalyst, a cause that is innocent, and it is going to lead to an effect that is serious, that will require a change of behavior, but they are intimately connected. Okay, so in the next dispensation, the early rain, what was unsealed? And that was the 2520. And the 2520 teaches that there are 2,520 days that will take you from 1798 to 2520. 2520 teaches that there are 220 days that will take you to 1798 and 25. Oh, geez.
That's correct. It's Seventh day for a year, but that's probably how she worded it. 2520 days to 1798 and 2520 days to 1844.
Yeah, that's how she said it. But yeah, because I was like, dates. Yeah. Okay. So are people inside the movement greatly threatened by the 2520? No. The 2520 is a cause that is going to lead to an effect. It starts innocently. And when does it become a threat? The 2520 is the key that unlocks time. So these are not separate messages. Time setting is based on the 126 and the 151. Once time setting is introduced, does it require a change of behavior? Yes, because it says that you are about to face your Sunday law. And now what happens? A division. The 2520 and time setting are intimately connected.
By the way, in your previous paragraph,
Yeah.
I think it should say, and we lose a lot when we cannot see how they fit.
Oh, yeah, that would totally make sense.
Yeah.
Thank you. That would totally make sense. Awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so like I said, I didn't finish her presentation on the first one, and she had more going from each of the different dispensations, but I think this will give you enough of a basis that it gave you, number one, the repeating pattern, and number two, the fact that each dispensation, although it looks like there's two separate messages, like right here, we have the line upon line, and then Daniel. It looks like it's two messages, but it's not. It's actually one message, but God, in his infinite mercy, has started us off on something simple that is not threatening. It's a cause, which is a catalyst to draw us into the um, the the bigger part of the message, the real message that causes a change of behavior, the effect. So we've got the cause and the effect, and he, you know, he does it in such a beautiful way, starting it off so simple in terms that we can understand, and slowly brings us to the harder part of it, which we would not have understood in the beginning. But because we've had this base message, the simple part, it brings us here, and then we're more accepting of that, the new part, the change of behavior part. The same with the 2520, which is a really non-threatening message. But if we had started off with the time setting part, nobody would have been ready for that, because we're told by Ellen White that there's not going to be another time setting, you know, message. And so we had to be drawn to that. We had to be drawn through the cause, the simple message, the non-threatening message, into the time message, where there's that's the effect, where it causes a change of behavior. Now this this new presentation that we're going to be doing right now is on the nature of the King of the South, and this is where we're going to be focusing our attention, which is that's going the message, the cause, the world wars message, the King of the North versus King of the South, to the change of behavior, the effect message of equality, and how we get there. So this is really important because there's several steps that take us from the world wars to equality. And after you see it, you know, after we step through it, you'll see that even in the world wars, in that message that we were studying and the history, equality was there. In the King of the North versus the King of the South, equality was there. And the information, the message on, you know, the information we were getting on the two streams, equality was there. We weren't focused on it. We were focused on the history and all this new information and the disinformation. And so we were focused on that. We weren't focusing on the equality, but it was there the whole time. And God just slowly took us by the hand and drew us right along until we got to the change of behavior, the effect part of this message. It's beautiful. So anyway, that's where we are now. So the nature of the King of the South. So she's going back and she's talking about what she talked about yesterday, which is in the presentation number 1 we just were talking about. So, and now I'm reading from her words. Before I was, you know, doing as best I could to get as much information down, but now we're going word for word for what Elder Tess said. So we started yesterday looking at the repeating pattern. We spoke about our understanding, particularly of reform lines, and how those reform lines have been refined. In part of that refinement, it became necessary when people started intentionally or unintentionally attacking the midnight cry to defend that message. To defend it, various studies were presented that reintroduced the logic behind the midnight cry message and defended its principles. I think we are all familiar with the study of half right and half wrong, and how from that came the study of histories of success and failure. Understanding success and failure is the alpha history and success is the omega history, was developed because of an attack on the message, but it also refined our reform line. It made us see the history of Moses, the beginning and end of ancient Israel, and the beginning of modern Israel in a much clearer fashion, where we could begin to explain their failures and disappointments. So every time the message came under attack, the response to that was made using the lines further refined our understanding of them. The first time that was done was in December of 2018, and that was the study of the repeating pattern. we drew up that study very briefly, reviewed it, and then we put it to one side because for about a year now, just speaking for myself, and that's the elder test, right? I have used that pattern every time I have approached reform lines, and I wanted to think about them from a different perspective. So I should have asked, did anybody have any questions or comments on this first part?
I only wanted to add that when you were doing your introduction about God's hand, you know, and you had the green hand,
Yeah,
that that, you know, there's many verses in the Bible that talks about a mighty hand, but the one that talks about gathering the mighty hand, I think is Ezekiel 20:34.
oh, you found it?
Well, there's several, but that's the one that actually has the term gathering in it. It says, and I will bring you out from the people and will gather you out of the countries wherein ye are scattered with a mighty hand, with a stretched out arm.
Is it, tell me again, Ezekiel, what was that?
Ezekiel 20, verse
20,
34.
34. Oh,
This is the reference. You know, there's other verses that use the term mighty hand.
awesome, thank you. Yeah, because she used the word hand and gathering, so I'm sure that must be it. So thank you.
And she used the hand to show that there's, you know, 5 fingers are the five way marks, and in between the fingers are the dispensations. 4
Fantastic,
dispensations and 5 way marks. I remember that.
thank you.
A
I
good
appreciate that.
visual.
Say again?
It's a good visual.
Yes. Yeah, I'm glad she did that because now every time I look at my hand, and then it's always easy to find the midpoint, you know, the Sunday law, right?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I'm really glad she did that. Thank you, Bob. So we have taken our 4 dispensations and our 5 way marks. What we have done is actually traced the messages. This isn't all the light that has come into the movement in the last 31 years. There have been other elements, but these are the messages that have tested, that have done the work of the plowing and watering this crop. We reminded, I don't think that's spelled right, but we reminded ourselves that it began with reform lines in 1989. We made the statement, without proving it, that understanding the principle of end from the beginning, our reform line, would end through a study of reform lines, that they would play a key part in this final dispensation. So question, is every line that we draw a reform line? And of course you can see the answer is no, but does everybody understand that? Does everybody know that, you know, because like we draw lines all the time, but they're not all reform lines. And I'm glad I rewatched this video because I was still having difficulty with that one. And she says, we're going to take a line of World War I and World War II and make that a line of World War III. So is that a reform line? Well, so is this like simple little line? Is that a reform line? Well, no, right? Thank you. Just because we draw a line doesn't make it a reform line. There are we have information lines, and we take World War II and we place it on a line. And when we do that, is it a reform line? No.
No.
Why? Because a reform line is to reform God's people. So World War II is not a reform line. The Third Diadochi War is not a reform line. Does anyone disagree? Does that make sense to everyone?
Yes, that makes sense.
Or is it confusing to anyone? Because at first it was like, because I know at first when I first watched this a long time ago, I didn't catch all that, and other people were trying to explain it, and I wasn't getting it. And now I finally have enough background that it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that totally makes sense now.
I understand it.
Okay, good. So what opens up at the time of the end is reform lines. The whole concept is that God's people need reformation. So God is going to do something to his people to bring about a reformation. So you will have something happen at the beginning of ancient Israel under Moses and Joshua. This is captivity to Egypt. Then you will find God's people in captivity to Rome during the time of John the Baptist and Christ. Then you will find them in captivity in 1260, and you will find Miller and Snow. So these are our reform lines. Now we have the 144,000 line, our Omega line history. And this is a line of reform because God's people have been in captivity for 126 years. So this is the board work she had. So the ancient Israel, this is Moses and Joshua, the Alpha, and then John the Baptist and Christ, the Omega. The modern Israel, the Alpha would be Miller and Snow from the Millerite history. And then the Omega is the 144,000, our reform line. So what opens up in 1984 is the reform line because God is doing a work of reforming his people. So when we go into history, we see battles of Raphia and Panium and Daniel 11. Is that a reform line? What reform?
Is that supposed to
No.
say 1989?
Mhm.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask the same question,
What
1984.
opens up in 1989?
Yeah, I think you're right. Thank you. 1989. Okay, my finger got in the way. Okay, thank you. What opens up in 1984 is the reform line. Right, thank you.
Mhm.
So you're right. That is not a reformation. There's no reformation happening. So it's the lines of Raphia and Panium and Daniel 11. The information, the battles of Raphia and Panium, those are not reform lines because there's no reformation happening. Those are lines of history, lines of information. Okay, so right here, she's bringing up a concept to try to help us to understand these lines. And so I tried to come up with some pictures to help us see what she's talking about, because at first it took me I had to see some pictures to understand what she was saying. So okay, so this is what I suggest. We have lines and we have reform lines. So we could go to the Third Diadochi War, and it will take you from 1989 to the Sunday Law. It is not a reform line. So do we all know what those glasses are, where you have a pair of spectacles and you put layers of glass over and you see more? It will give you some more details. Usually there are one pane of glass that is the foundation. Then over that, you would put another layer over another layer over another layer, and it could be used in a laboratory. The concept of a microscope is different, but you could use that. So this is the only picture I could find on that, but hopefully the other part, she comes into a different example, and this might help even better. So even if they're not glasses that go over your eyes, sometimes they are a plate of glass. People do it with plates of glass to create a 3D picture. So you have a layer of glass that has very little detail, and you will take another layer of glass that might have a mountain etched into it or a painted on it. And then you will take another layer of glass and it might have a deer. Then you will take another layer of glass and it might have a tree, and adding those layers together make the picture three-dimensional. It adds a layer of each depth. So you can see in this picture here that each one of these panes has a different piece of etched on it. And once they layer these etched glasses together, it makes a picture. And there's some more examples. Hopefully, let's see if I can bring some of those up. Do you guys see my webpage, or do you see the document still?
Yeah, we see the
Webpage?
webpage.
Okay, great. So here's one of Jesus on the cross, and you can see that it's different panels, right? And it makes one picture. And there are some others. Let's see if they come out. This one is a tree. So is there anyone that doesn't see it? Can you all see what it's doing? So each layer has a little bit of piece of this picture, and then you layer them all together and you get this 3D image, which you wouldn't have seen without each of the layers. It's so this is what she's trying to get across. I think there's one more. Wait, that's not it. This one. And so each of these pieces of glass has a little bit, a piece of this face, and then you put it all together and you get the whole picture. Cool. So we have our reform line that is the key reform line at the end of modern Israel. Then to understand the reform line, we can take these other lines, like the Third Diadochi War, and it's like one of these layers of glass. You put it over our reform line, and all of a sudden it will transform it. It will add depth. All of a sudden, out of our reform line will become a story about the Gulf War, the Iraq War, the invasion of Ukraine. So these other lines are laid over our reform line, and they add depth and meaning. Each layer is to help tell a particular story. So one of the layers of glass that you would overlay our reform line with to be the story of ISIS or radical Islam. And another layer might be the First World War, the story of the King of the North and the story of the King of the South, or actually the story of the King of the North and the King of the South. Another layer of glass might be the church and state, and we talk about moral majority in Jerry Falwell. So does that all make sense? So can you guys all picture that? Do you guys have any questions?
Yeah, putting all the lines together, it gives more depth, more information.
Exactly. So we've got our reform lines, but those other information lines are being laid over the top of our reform line to give it that extra information, to make it help us to understand these patterns and the things, the characteristics and the details of what we should be seeing to get us to what we need, the information that we need to know to be able to present, to understand equality or any of the testing messages.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Oh my man, I just lost my thought. Sorry.
Oh,
And that makes sense because I'm trying to have my thought come back, but it just because as God is reforming his people, there's other things happening too within those histories. So having those other lines, it does add depth because we can see more broader of what's happening within those those histories and also dispensations, that. So
exactly, yeah. And
The way I understand it is all the lines are, as she started out talking with this whole thing as you did, are the repeating patterns.
Yeah.
We're talking about history. So every line is a repeating pattern, but not every line is a reform line. But if you take a reform line and you take some of these other repeating patterns of lines that aren't reform lines and you put them over our reform line, like you said, it adds depth.
Exactly. Exactly. Good. Does anybody have any questions on it? Is there anything that we could add to it that would make it clearer? Have I lost anybody?
No, but I really like the visual. It really, I mean,
Yeah.
even with the hand, now I'm looking at the hand and I'm thinking of reform lines with that hand, you know, the 4 dispensations and the
Uh-huh.
5 waymarks. I mean, it just makes it so much easier. And yeah, it's great.
Amen. Praise the Lord. He's so good for us. Awesome. So we have all these other layers of glass, and we don't put them all over our reform line at once. If we were to do that, we have such a quantity of information now that there would be no space between the letters. The whiteboard would be black. So what we do is strip our reform line down to the basics. Just that base reform line, that bottom layer of glass. And then we go through all of our stories and we pick what story we want to tell. Here we have been covering today, we want to actually talk about the messages, the internal change. So we are not going to add all of those layers. This is the messages. We just take these added layers and we pick which one we want to overlay depending on our story. It becomes important that we do not mix our stories. This is really important. Because if you mix your stories, you could have really bad outcomes, and she's going to explain that right here. So I will give you an example. In October of 2018, we made a prediction. We said that in 2019, Donald Trump would be impeached. How did we do that? We went back to 1865, and in 1865, Abraham Lincoln is assassinated. He is against slavery. He is for equality. He has been fighting for equality. He is assassinated in 1865, and the vice president takes power. So this is Andrew Johnson, and Andrew Johnson is pro-slavery. He supports the South. Abraham Lincoln had only allowed him into his government to try to appease the South. Abraham Lincoln is against slavery and he's assassinated. Andrew Johnson becomes president and he is for slavery. Johnson has an interesting personality. He likes abusing people, giving nicknames to his political opponents, and conducting massive rallies. He gets so bad that in 1868, he is impeached. Right here. So the first presidential impeachment right here, for someone to be impeached, the House of Representatives votes. The House of Representatives draws up articles of impeachment and then they vote. The House voted to impeach him. Johnson was impeached by the House. But to be removed as a president, the Senate then has to vote to impeach him, but the Senate did not. So Johnson was impeached, but he was not removed. We went to this history and we used the 151. So I'm not going to get into the details of 151. Hopefully you guys all understand that. Is there anybody who doesn't understand the 151? Okay, so there's studies on that, and it comes from the 126. 126 is 10% of the 1,260 years, and so this is the 126 is our 1260, you know, and which we came out of, and the 151 has to do it's the same, only it has to do with a different way of reading the Tekel Upharsin in Belshazzar's story. So that's where we get the 151. And so from 1865 to, if you add 151 years to 1865, you get to 2016, which is between Obama and Trump. And then at the impeachment, which was 1868, you add 151 years, you get to 2019, which was Trump's impeachment. So you can see that when Trump was elected, that was 2016, there was 3 years, and then he was impeached. Johnson started in 1865. After 3 years, he was impeached. So we went to this history and we used the 151 in 2016, which is 151 years from 1865. The president changed from Barack Obama, who was for equality, to Donald Trump, who was against equality. One is essentially for slavery, this one, and one is against slavery. Andrew Johnson did not win an election, and Trump did not win an election legally. Okay, we all know that he did not win the, what's it called? The popular vote. And so he should not have won the electoral vote, but yeah, that's the way things go. So 3 years after Johnson became president, he was impeached. And 3 years after Trump became president, he also faced impeachment. The House voted and he was impeached. Trump is, or she said is because she was speaking at that time in 2020 and he was still president. Right now, I added this in, these are my words. So Trump was a president who has been impeached. But for him to be removed, the Senate has to vote against him, and they did not. So you can see it followed the same pattern as Johnson's impeachment, just as we expected it would. Now, Elder Jeff launched an attack. He says that this was a failed prophecy because the vote to impeach Donald Trump in the House did not take place on November 9th, 2019. So just so you guys know, anytime you see these type of brackets, these little square brackets, that's where I added information that she didn't actually say, but it clarifies because, you know, because she's, if you don't know when she spoke this, then I don't know, just add it's just for clarification. So he says that it is a failed prophecy because the vote in the House did not take place on the 9th of November. The problem is he's doing what we tend to do. We actually make the same mistake quite regularly. When we think about our layers of glass, we need to keep them separate. And this is a story of impeachment. It is not the story of November 9. So Andrew Johnson was not impeached on November 9, 1868. There was no connection to November 9 when it comes to America's history of impeachments, and it's not part of our story. So what people try to do is they try to fuse together these layers of glass when they should be separated, studied, and if reasonable, overlaid, but you don't fuse or force them together. The House was never going to impeach Donald Trump on a Saturday. And we knew that November 9th was the Sabbath from the very beginning before the message was even presented. We get into trouble when we start mixing our layers, and everyone who does not understand the message properly does this. And almost every time that Elder Jeff attacks this message, it's because he is doing that. He doesn't understand the layers. Any questions?
That was
Comments?
really good.
Yeah, she did a really good job of breaking this down. I was so excited about going back to listen to this. coming back to here, so 1989 on the line of the priest, we have key reform lines. That's our base. Then over our base, we can place different stories. In 1989, what's given us becomes the foundation of everything else that we study and do. Everything else is built on reform lines. The first thing people have to abandon when they leave this movement. If people actually believed the reform lines, which is what was given us at the time of the end, no one would ever dare leave this message, this movement. Okay. So this goes with this. Okay, so we approached each dispensation. Reform lines themselves are innocent, but they're going to develop into a challenge, a test. This doesn't hurt the first part of the message, the cause, and this does, the second part of the message, the effect. This doesn't require a change of behavior, the first part of the message, the cause, but this does, the second part of the message, the effect. So reform lines became Daniel 11:40 to 45. So come to the early rain here. The 2520 does not challenge you in any way. It's a time prophecy that ended in 1844, the last one, but it is a cause that leads to an effect, time setting, that requires a change of behavior. This reform lines, she's pointing at this, reform lines here, I'm sorry, she's pointing at this reform lines and Daniel 11:40 is one message, cause and effect. And then this one is one message, 2520 and time, cause and effect. Then we come to the latter rain, this one. King of the North versus King of the South and equality. So how is this cause and effect? How do we go from World War I, World War II, the study, to equality between men and women? Does anyone want to answer that? Does anyone? This is where I got stuck. It's like, okay, I know it's true, but how do I get there? And so this was why I was really excited because she just broke it down so easy. And at the end of this, oh, it's like, okay, I totally get it now. Okay, so it is all encapsulated in two streams of information. So equality is already there. It's already here. It's already here, but no one can easily define it. How do you go from the world wars to church and state? So we want to go from King of the North versus King of the South, the world wars, to equality. And then Catherine, so she's, just to remind you that she's in the School of the Prophets, and so she's talking to the classroom. And so people are speaking back and forth. A lot of times you cannot hear what's being said in the class. And so I did my best. And so right here, it says that Catherine reminded us of two streams of information. So Catherine's the one who put the two streams of information in there when she asked this question above about how do you get from World War I, World War II to the study of equality. And Catherine said two streams of information. So this connects with the Battle of Ipsus from the Fourth Diadochi War. And without going into the Fourth Diadochi War, there was a lot of misinformation, which brought us to the two streams of information, and which connects to the invasion of Poland. So two streams of information connects directly with the world wars. So where do we go next? Answer from class. The Second World War, you have an information war where propaganda was used. So you can come back to the information war model. So one of the arguments that was used in October 3 of 2019, when there was a fight with Elder Jeff about the subject of two streams, he said both sides are equal. And every time he said both sides are equal, our response was, well, you have Churchill and you have Hitler. Are both sides equal? Well, no. Was Churchill necessarily a good moral man? Probably not. But do we care? Not really. Every time the argument was made, Clinton is morally bad. Clinton is morally bad, therefore she is equally as bad as Trump. It is a rejection of the two streams, where one leads to the sea of glass and one leads to the lake of fire. We come back to this model, Churchill and Hitler. Let's say it is 1933 and Hitler is rising to power. Hitler has his propaganda machine. Well, does Churchill have a propaganda machine? Yes. Are they equally as bad? Can you stand back and say, I don't care if we have Churchill or Hitler, or I'm just going to listen to no one. They're all as bad as each other. Could you do that in Germany in 1933? No. You had to stand on the side of Churchill, because whether or not he was particularly moral in his private life, whether or not you thought he shared propaganda, all of that becomes irrelevant, because even prophetically, and people were required to see this separate from that, if you are standing in 1933, you don't get to say they are as bad as each other, and I am supporting no one. You have to be able to choose between right and wrong. So does that make sense? So I am just referring to what is mentioned, bringing this to an information war and propaganda. We've looked at the two streams. I had already brought this subject to the movement. You could see that race was the issue under everything else, connected with this issue of sexism, but that wasn't enough. Two streams weren't enough to bring a solid message of equality in a way that gave people no excuse. So what step had to be taken? What model has to be used? When you're talking about the King of the North and the King of the South, what model are you automatically forced to use before you get to church and state? And it involves the world wars, that you have North and South. So what model is that? Geography. So the King of the North, King of the South forces you to use the model of geography. We don't just rifle through our models, we pick one. It is already given to us. Now, just so you know, it kind of looks like we're just pulling things out, but she'll walk us through, and in the end, it'll totally make sense if we don't already see it. So picture in your mind already that we're started with the world wars. Now, how do we get from world wars to geography? Because we're talking about the King of the North and the King of the South. Well, if you're talking about the North and the South, you're talking about like a globe, right? And you've got the North Pole and the South Pole, right? And so that's how it brings us to the model of geography. And we don't just so if you think about the globe. Now on the globe, the world spins on an axis. It spins on the north and south axis. So it's going around in a circle on the north and south axis, where the North Pole and the South Pole are a specific point. You can take a compass and you could go to either the North Pole or the South Pole. right? And yeah, they move over time, you know, a little inch here, a little inch there, but it's still, you know, in one day you could take a compass and you could go directly to the North Pole or the South Pole. But you can't do that to the east and the west because the globe, the earth is spinning, right? And so there's constantly this, you can't just say, you know, where's east, where's, you know, it's always spinning. And so that's how we get this model of geography, because we've got the North Pole and the South Pole. We've got the king of the North, the king of the South. So we have the North and the South, king of the North, king of the South. And so once we have king of the North, king of the South, we bring them to the model of geography. We think about the 4 directions of the compass, because Daniel 11 will tell you there are 4, not 2. There are 4 directions to consider, but it ends on focusing on north and south, because these are the ones that are polar opposites. These are the ones on which the rest of the world turns. It turns from the north and it turns from the south. And what did we say about the north and the south, these 2 poles? We had 2 thoughts. Number 1, they are opposites as opposed to each other as they can possibly get. That's why they are called polar opposites. And number 2, and at the same time, they are completely opposed to one another. They are at the same time that they are completely opposed to each other, they are also the same. They are almost identical. One has ice, the other has ice. There are in many ways so similar that if you were to be standing in one, you would not know which one you were at, unless of course you saw a polar bear or a penguin, right? It's not like one is really hot or one is really cold. So someone from the class said, it's a mirror image. And Elder Tessa's response says, I like the concept of a mirror image because it is completely switched, but it is the same image. It's not a new picture. That is a good analogy. So the king of the north and the king of the south are mirror images of each other. It isn't as if the North Pole is really cold and the South Pole is really hot. And that's the way we have kind of pictured it in the past. We would say that the king of the north is all religious and the king of the south is all atheist. The king of the north, all religion, king of the south, no religion. And that is not a mirror image. Instead, we find them both in this church-state relationship. Okay, so I think I'm missing a picture. Okay, there was a picture there, it disappeared. So just picture this. You've got the church over state, and this one with the state over the church, because they're both in a church-state relationship. Now we're going to skip over to, we're going to kind of go on a little bit of a sidetrack to get back to this. So this is about Putin. So we're talking about the king of the south. So we began to consider Vladimir Putin, the king of the south. We saw how he became president in 1999, right here. And just to remind us that the Constitution was written by Gorbachev in 1993. So he is elected in 2000. He runs 2 consecutive 4-year terms. That is all he's allowed in their constitution. According to this constitution, he's allowed 2 4-year terms, just like in the United States. And he steps down and he places a puppet in as a president, Dmitry Medvedev, who runs just 1 term, 1 4-year term. So Putin forms a plan before 2008 that helps him hold on to power. In 2012, he returns as president with term limits. So the term limits are already set. The way she spoke, she made it sound like Putin would change the term limits here. And so I'm adding these words in here because I had to go double check, right? And I think it's just the way it was worded. I know it's not what wasn't intentional, but she made it sound like he changed the 4-year terms to 6-year terms. Well, he did, but he had it done under Medvedev. So in 2008, so I have right here from Wikipedia, and I found it in other places, not just this one, but this is where I've got a link to it. So the terms were extended from 4 to 6 years in 2008 during Dmitry Medvedev's administration. Okay, and so this, so the term limits by the time Putin was reelected in 2012, the term limits were now 6 years. Okay, which gave him an extra 4 years. So if you run for 2 consecutive 6-year terms, you end up actually being, you know, like 3 4-year terms, right? Because 6 and 6 is 12 and 4 and 3 is 12. So this is like running or going 3 4-year terms is what she's saying here. So now it's like he has been able to run for 3 terms, 3 of these 4-year terms. So these 2 6-year terms end in 2024. And he already has a plan. So by this point, I'm saying, so we're not there 24, but as by this point, so she's talking in 2020, he already has a plan. So like in this space right here, he's already coming up with something new to hold on to that power. So I'll give, go ahead.
I think he wants to go follow the system that the Chinese has done, which is the president for life.
And North Korea.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you'll see that, okay, when she's talking about this in 2020, the theory is that he is going to change the power from president to prime minister and then become the prime minister.
Right.
But there's an update. So I'll read the update first. So the update in April 5th, 2021, that's this year, just last April, and from Moscow, the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, signed into law on Monday a change to the country's constitution that will allow him to run for 2 more 6-year terms, granting him the chance to remain in power until 2036. And I think he was 68 at the time or right now. And so that would, so if he's 68 and he runs 12 more years, that would put him up at 80 at the end of 2036, you know? So we'll go back in time to what Elder Tess is talking about in 2020. And this is back then, we were having a different thoughts because we didn't know that he was going to do this. So I'll give you an article from The Guardian. It's called Russian Government Quits as Putin Plans to Stay in Power Past 2024. So Vladimir Putin has begun this attempt to completely reshuffle power in Russia. There was a constitution written in 1993 by Boris Yeltsin, and now Putin is working to amend that constitution, shaking up other sources of power. He announced that he was going to do that he would bring about a national referendum to remake the constitution in a way that would shift power away from any new president to the state council. Sometimes there is so much news right now, we can miss major stories. So true. So Dmitry Medvedev, the president from 2008 to 2012, was his prime minister. Early middle January 2020, Putin announced this plan, and Medvedev resigned as prime minister, and with him resigned the entire Russian government. They resigned in full hours after Putin's announcement. So you can see how this has shaken up Russia. We spoke briefly about this change, moving the power from the president to the state council. Some people are still suggesting that he might actually move it to the role of prime minister and then become prime minister. That is exactly what, I don't know how to say this. Does anybody know how to pronounce his name? Of the president from Turkey.
I can do Erdogan.
Okay, we'll just go with Erdogan. So Erdogan did that in Turkey as a president. He changed the balance of power between president and prime minister. So that is what Putin is currently doing. That was in 2020. But to have people's support in doing this, he is allowing everyone to send in their ideas for a new constitution. So back to this, it's amazing that he was able to, work this part out, where, he was able to put into law to extend the terms while he was as president. And of course they let him. And like Donna said, and Renee, that he was following what the Chinese government does, president for life, right? And what Donald Trump thinks that he is, I think, after what he's thinking, that he still has presidential, what's it called when, because he's been trying to keep all those documents from getting out. He's presidential
Immunity.
immunity, is it? Well, it's like where he's got control
So-
over this
Privilege.
Oh,
Privilege. presidential privilege, so he can prevent those documents from getting out. I really liked what the judge said, that the president is not king and you are not president. It's like, all right. So I'm sure they'll take that one to the Supreme Court, but until then. Okay, so, and what were some of those ideas? So some of those ideas that the Russian people were sending in to Putin about what they wanted in the Constitution. So what have the Protestants in America wanted for 200 years? And that was to declare America a Christian nation. So now, to get his change of power, Putin is willing to write into the Constitution of the King of the South that it is a Christian nation. So this is not hot north. So she's pointing here. This is not hot, the north part, and cold south. This is not just for religion and just against religion, the South. It's much more subtle. Christians in America want it declared as a Christian nation, and Christians in Russia want it declared as a Christian nation. And it is the King of the South that's about to do that. So what else do Protestants want written into the Constitution of America? They have tried this one before and have never gotten it in. So prayer in schools is one of them, but not the one that I'm thinking of. It is not abortion, but you're headed in the right direction. So what they want to write into the Russian Constitution is that marriage is only a union between a man and a woman. That is something Protestants in America have wanted, but never gotten in. So the King of the South is about to declare his country a Christian nation and introduce into the Constitution Christian morality. And I think he did do this, right? I don't think I went and did the research on it, but I'm pretty sure that he did put into the Constitution that a marriage is between a man and a woman. And he did put in that they were he put it in there about a Christian nation, but he didn't, I don't think he actually used those words. So he put it, the way he did that part was kind of interesting. He said something about going along with their ancestry, but it wasn't clear. That part wasn't clear, but the whole union between a man and a woman is pretty clear in their Constitution. So those who reject this message, they say that America is not the king of the North because it has an army. Question. The king of the South has an army. Whose army is that? So that is a different subject. But if they don't want to call America the king of the North because it has an army, and they think the king of the North can only be a church, they have to be consistent. The king of the South is not the king of the South. The king of the South becomes a church fighting with an army. And you have to ask, on behalf of who? Who are they fighting for? So that is a thought for those struggling with America being the king of the North. But we assume that they believe that Russia is the king of the South and that it is not an atheist nation. So if the king of the North is church over state, the king of the South is the state controlling the church. So Donald Trump, he came to power because the church allowed him. The church gave him power, gave Trump power, and they can take it away from him at any time they choose. The Russian Orthodox Church did not give Vladimir Putin power. He, the state, gave power to the church, and he can take it away at any time he chooses. So this comes back to the concept of mirror image that Sue Ellen introduced. So they are both a church-state relationship, but the opposite. So do we all understand the mirror image? Is that anybody
Yes.
have any questions?
Very good.
Awesome. Anybody have any questions? Cool. So it's the same image, back to front. You don't have an image of a phone and the mirror image that it becomes a cup. It's the same picture. It is also opposite. It is switched, just like the North and South Pole, which is why there is no leading head of state in the world that is more nationalistic, white supremacist, sexist, and homophobic than Vladimir Putin. He is the one fighting for Jewish Christian morality, not for some atheistic concept. He is fighting for the church. So do we have any thoughts or questions so far? Ready? So we have been talking about the king of the North and the king of the South as a mirror image, not as opposites, as they sometimes have been portrayed in the past. So how do we get from equality? So how do we get to there from equality? Okay, so we have gone from the king of the North, king of the South, to the model of geography, to polar opposites, which are the mirror image, to church and state. Now what's our next step? So people must have grown up with different sermons than I grew up listening to, because for the whole concept of this, church over state, people would go to Revelation and see the woman riding the beast, Jezebel and Ahab. When they talk about Jezebel and Ahab, who is the really wicked one they hate? Jezebel. And it is always portrayed to me, Elder Tess, that they almost felt sorry for Ahab, this poor beaten down husband submitting to his wife. So people always approached this church over state and brought it to a relationship between a woman and a man, woman riding the beast. Does that make sense? So can someone please take us back to the world wars and step through the logic to equality? Who is willing to do that? And then Elder Tess points to someone in the class. She says, start with the world wars. And so the person in the class says, so you have the world wars, and they're taking place between the king of the North and the king of the South. They fight against each other. They have a church and state relationship that is not balanced. And then Elder Tess pauses that person speaking. And she says, pause before you come to the church and state model. We have gone world wars to king of the North, king of the South. And what do you automatically have to do when given those names? King of the North, king of the South. So you have the world wars, right here. Let's see. The world wars take us to the king of the north versus the king of the south, which take us to geography. It's because once you have the king of the north, king of the south, that takes us straight to geography. And then once you go to the model of geography, so this is what Daniel 11 gives you, north and south, east and west. Now what is next? You're lining them up on the model of geography. So two things about them you can learn from this. Number one, they are completely opposite. And number two, they are also the same. It's a mirror image. So from there, okay, so parts of this response was inaudible. And then so there's an inaudible part, and then the person says, the model of the church over the state or state over church are false. They are a wrong model. The correct model should be where they are in balance. That would be where man equals woman. And then Elder Test says, so we are going to go from the world wars to king of the north, king of the south, which forces you into a model of geography, to a subject of polar opposites, completely opposite, almost entirely the same. It's a mirror image. And then we see what is actually being mirrored. And the definition of the king of the north is this church and state relationship, where the church controls the state. The king of the south is a mirror image of that church and state relationship, almost identical, but where the state controls the church. And once we understand church and state, state and church, God's people for centuries have gone to Revelation and seen that that relationship is wrong. What year did we first understand that the king of the south is state over church? When was that first introduced? In 2019. We never understood this before last year, 2019. So we have understood for centuries, if not millennia, this model of king of the north. So king of the south, we understand in 2019. It was identified in 2018, but it was not presented until 2019 because we knew this was going to cause problems. So Elder Tess and Elder Parmenter knew about this, but they knew it was going to cause problems. And it had already started to cause problems just through people seeing it in the two streams of information. So they didn't start off with this information. They took us through the long way around the mountain, as Elder Parmenter does, for our own benefit. So do you have any questions of the King of the South model? Anybody? Okay, so we're not done yet. She's gonna like give us more examples because to me, I mean, you can go back, like right now, you can see like in the King of the North, King of the South, the equality, because you have the church over the state, state over the church, geography, you've got, you know, it's not, yeah, okay, so the King of the North, King of the South, the opposites, and then church over state relationship will give you equality. So give us some other King of the South examples in history. What is another King of the South we have in history? Ptolemy. So Ptolemy in Egypt, that's one. In France, another one, Stalin. Okay, so Roland, he gave France, is it a church-state relationship? And then Roland says that the state is above the church. I think this should probably be a question mark. Roland says that the state is above the church, and Elder Test says, so there's a church. Because many people would argue that France is atheistic France and that there is no church. So I want us to look at these three King of the South examples and not go into great detail, but I know even if you don't have questions now, this is what will come up to your mind. Some may think church-state relationship, then you will be lying in bed tonight and think, well, what about atheistic France? I thought they killed the church. Does anyone want to add to that? You can pick any one of these, Ptolemy, France, Stalin, which is the Soviet Union. So from the class, go ahead, you have a
Excuse me?
question? Uh-huh,
Yeah, so a paragraph above,
uh-huh.
let's see, okay, right there. Okay, so the king of the south we have in history, Ptolemy. So Ptolemy, Egypt, that's one. France, another one. Who's Roland?
Okay, so Roland is a student, so I should put that in there.
Okay, Stalin, Roland, France. Okay,
Yeah, he's one of
Student
the students that was in Portugal.
okay. Yes,
Roland
because
says, I should put
Okay.
it like this. Because you're right, that didn't, I was reading it and I knew it and it didn't make sense to me either. So student Roland, Mama says,
okay, thank you.
France. Yeah, no, thank you for pointing that out. So France, and then he says France, and then I think Elder Tess says, is it a church-state relationship? Okay, and then Roland says that the state is above the church. And Elder Tess says, so there's a church, because many people would argue that it is atheistic France and that there is no church. Cool, thank you. Okay. So after she says we're going to work on these, Ptolemy, France, and Stalin, she asked somebody from the audience, from the class, to go through it. And so from the class, someone says, Clovis adopted the Catholic Church, the Catholic faith. And Elder Tess says, Clovis did. Why did he do that? From the class, so he would receive power. Elder Tess says, so who gave power to Clovis? And from the class, the Catholic Church, the Pope. Elder Tess says, so the church gave the power to the state. So you know that it is a King of the North model because the church is giving the power to the state. That's a King of the North model right there, where Clovis only had power as the church gave it to him. Does that make sense? So the state wanted power. He had to get it from the church. Donald Trump wanted power. He had to get it from from Protestantism, same model as Clovis. So we will do Ptolemy last. If we work from the bottom up, we'll start with Stalin. So Stalin came to power, and what did he do to the church? Okay, so I just noticed that it is 7:54. And we are on page 16. So we're just going to look at, take a quick look. There's 21 pages. So we're at the end of this. So this is like 1, 2, 3 pictures, 4 pictures. Do you guys want to keep going? I think we could be done at 15 after.
Yeah, we'll keep going.
Okay, sorry. Okay. So we will do Ptolemy last. If we work from the bottom up, Stalin. So Stalin came to power, and what did he do to the church? At the beginning, he just killed them all, burnt their churches, killed their priests. He just eradicated religion. Until when? What day did he stop? I'll give you the year. 1941. Stalin stops crushing the church in 1941. He stopped shortly before he joined the Allies. And why did he join the Allies? So Germany is the King of the North, and Germany invades Soviet Union. And the day they invade, Stalin's first fear was that he has put down all of these Russian Orthodox Christians and other religions, and he is afraid all of those people would turn to Hitler as their savior. So across all the radios on July 3rd, 1941, he transmits this message, and she's paraphrasing. So rise up and save our Christian fatherland from pagan Germany. He is trying to attack us like crucifying Christ because we are this Christian nation. So that is a paraphrase, but that is the essence of what Stalin had transmitted. So we think that Stalin was just out to completely destroy the church. He always maintained an iron grip on the church, but he needed the church. So he quickly learned not to destroy it entirely. He starts by trying to eradicate it entirely. Then he wakes up one day, realizes that his enemies, realizes he has enemies, and realizes that he needs the church to keep some control of the people. So Stalin's Soviet Union was a church-state relationship, just where the state kept an iron grip on the church, but still allowed it to exist. Does that make sense? Any questions on Stalin's Soviet Union? So you move up to France next. In France, question? Yeah, okay. France started the same way as the Soviet Union, the complete eradication of religion. And just like Stalin, what did they realize? It doesn't work without religion. So we might mock their goddess of reason, because France had the goddess of reason, but why did they do that? And Elder Tess, agreeing with a comment from the class, says because religion is the opium of the people, because somebody said that. Religion is the opium of the people. Problem is that someone asked Vladimir Putin if he believed that, and he said no. And I would suggest he does believe that. It's how he operates, but he sees it as something positive to manipulate. So France, they start just like Stalin, stamping out religion. They realize fairly early that people need religion and it makes them malleable, controllable, and they try to reintroduce a religion that they could control. That doesn't go so well. And in 1798, they take the Pope captive. 3 years later, in 1801, what do they do? What does Napoleon do? They end the breach between France and the papacy and reaffirm the Catholic Church, not as the religion of France, but permissible in France. So prior to the French Revolution, the church controlled the state. They're going to turn from the church controlling the state to the state where the state tries to kill the church. They realize that's not very smart. So they accept the church in 1801 as long as the state controls the church, as long as they can flip that balance of power, because the King of the South is fine with the church as long as it submits. So I'll give a summary. At the beginning of the French Revolution, they're in a church-state relationship where the Catholic Church controls the state of France. They've had enough of this church, so their immediate reaction is to try to kill the church, destroy it. But they soon realize that it isn't very smart. It's kind of like their 10-day work week. Nothing operates very smoothly. So they try and reintroduce a church. They bring in this goddess of reason. That is kind of like a compromise. They're still trying to introduce some type of worship, even if it looks more pagan. That doesn't work. Towards the end of the French Revolution, they take down the Catholic Church. They reintroduce the Catholic Church 3 years later. But the reason that they do that is because they have been able to switch the balance of power. They have no power with the Catholic Church in France they have no problem with the Catholic Church in France as long as it is in submission to the state. This is what they were fighting against, the church over the state. But Napoleon is happy for a church that he controls. So over that revolutionary history in the early years of Napoleon, it's turning from the King of the North to the King of the South. And what changes inside France is that power balance from the church in power to the state in power. The king was in a church-state relationship, but so was Napoleon. And Napoleon was in a relationship with the Catholic Church, and he was fine with that as long as he was the one in power. Does that make sense? Are they in the thoughts or questions on France? So then Tamina asks a question, and she says, so in the scenario, Napoleon would be depicting the king of the South, and then we take the story of Napoleon and make him king of the North and show how he is Donald Trump, right? And then how do we do this? And Elder Tess answers, layers. So then she responds to it by asking a question. So this is her answer, right? Using layers. She says, is Abraham Lincoln good or bad? It depends on your story. Are you telling a story of church and state, or are you telling a story of slavery? So when Napoleon wants to be crowned emperor, he asks the Pope to crown him. What's the problem with doing that? If I got on my knees and Tamina put a crown on my head, who is the one giving the power? The Pope, the church. So what is Napoleon going to do? He's going to snatch the crown from the Pope's hands and crown himself king, because he knows what he is doing. There is no way he is going to allow the Pope to put a crown on his head. He will put it on his own head. That is not the behavior of the King of the North. So you can see how France went from being the King of the North with the church-state relationship to the King of the South, where the state is now in control. It's the state over the church. So was Ptolemy in a church-state relationship? I want to give you a reference. It might only work if you use Audible, but you might be able to find it online. There's a university lecturer. It's a series called The Great Courses. The topic is history and the subtopic is ancient history. This one is called Alexander the Great and the Hellenistic Age. Now this is hours of listening. I would suggest you do what I did and skip the parts you don't feel relevant. Professor Jeremy McInerney is very easy to listen to, and it is a lecture that he does, lecture 6, Egypt under the Ptolemies. He's going to go through how Egypt operated. This one is about 30 minutes long. There are altogether 24 lectures, 30 minutes each, so there are 12 hours. It will go through the history of the Maccabees and Seleucus. There is a lot that is interesting, but if you are short on time like I am, the one I found relevant was lecture 6, Egypt on the Ptolemies. And I can't teach that like a university professor. I'll just tell you his conclusion, his bullet points. So he would describe Egypt under the Ptolemies as the exact same system of economy as Stalin's Soviet Union. So you weren't allowed to grow a crop in Egypt without permission of the government. And then they would tell you what to grow, where to grow, and when to plant. You weren't allowed to own your own equipment. For example, if you wanted their equivalent of a shovel, you would need a letter of permission from the government, and then the government would lend you a shovel. You would have a sealed letter, and then when you were done with that shovel, you would need to give it back. Then the government inspectors would come that would look at your crop, and they would say you're watering an hour too early or an hour too late or too much. Finally, an inspector would come, they would look at your crop, and they would say, tomorrow you're going to harvest. You have absolutely no choice because the property is not yours. You would harvest it and then you would sell it to the government. You were not permitted to sell independently. So Ptolemy's Egypt, he would describe as the exact same system as the Soviet Union under Stalin. Because Ptolemy was not a native Egyptian, he had to control this whole country. So how is Ptolemy going to control this whole country? He's going to create a new religion, almost identical to their national religion, native religion, but he is going to change elements, and he is going to use religion to control the people. Then he goes into a deal with the priest. They have a contract. He will allow this religion to operate if they give complete loyalty to the government. So Ptolemy is in a church-state relationship, but he used the church, the whole pagan system, to control the people. In fact, if you were to look at the Rosetta Stone, the Rosetta Stone is a contract between the new Ptolemy, a new pharaoh, and the priest, because he was young, he was weak, and he had to make sure he had their support. So he writes up a new contract. And I just want to say, you cannot make this up. God has put this in place in his perfect timing. So the ultimate king of the south of Daniel 11, we should all know to look at the very beginning to understand the king of the south. And Egypt under the Ptolemies was not an atheistic kingdom. If the king of the south of Daniel 11 is not atheistic, we cannot define the king of the south as atheism. Does that make sense? The king of the south in Daniel 11 was a church-state relationship, but this new Greek government controlled and used the church. So I'll summarize. We have shown our steps for this final, our last dispensation. What we are trying to prove is, just like our two previous dispensations, it is one message with a cause and effect. Reform lines. So reform lines in Daniel 11:40 to 45 are one. 25:20 and time setting are another. The next one, King of the North versus King of the South and equality. The problem that most people have had, particularly those who have left, is that they think that these King of the North, King of the South, and equality are not connected. So the messages have been manipulated, and we are stepping through the history of how these opened up to show that they are connected, that the King of the North and the King of the South through the world wars took us to the model of geography, which showed us polar opposites, mirror image, and what they are mirror imaging is the church-state relationship. And the minute you come to church-state relationship, every Adventist I've ever met would talk about Revelation and understood you were talking about a relationship, even in marriage. So it was through the King of the North, King of the South, that we studied and understood equality. It was cause and effect. No one had a problem with the world wars. It was not the test. Just like the 25:20 was not the test, reform lines were not the test. Our test is here at equality. There were three messages presented October 2018. King of the North versus King of the South, the triple application of the world wars. 2, November 9, 2019. 3, two streams of information. People accepted the first two, King of the North, versus King of the South, the triple application of the wars, and November 9th, 2019. And then they had thought they had passed the test. They thought that was easy. And now we can move on to other studies. But this movement, they thought this movement was in unity, that it was safe. But those weren't the test. The test was the two streams of information. So it was the third one that rejecting became dangerous. And that is why from January of last year, 2019, it was two streams of information that was over and over again presented. And people who didn't understand what was happening would say, you are too defensive of this message. This message is too strong. It is not such a big deal. But what they didn't see developing was the crack that led directly to the split in September 2019, because the third one was the test, not the first two. It's two streams that encapsulate the subject of equality. Do you have any thoughts or questions before we close? So we used the repeating pattern, unsealed, increase of knowledge, formalization, test. We step back from that, and then we show that there's a testing message in each dispensation. And this is how the message develops. So you can expect that our dispensation, there will be something introduced, and it might seem easy at the start. If it seems easy, be careful, because if it is easy, it is not the test. It has an implication that we haven't yet seen. So let's just do a quick summary of getting from the world wars to equality. So in this part, just a note, she didn't put in the two streams. But I watched number 3 and she did, and it made more sense to me. And so her summary in number 3 was world wars with the triple application. Same, goes the same, King of the North versus King of the South. Daniel 11 with the model of geography, and the North and the South are polar opposites with definite locations but mirror image. Church and state relationships, the difference between the King of the North and the King of the South is the balance of power. The two streams of information, and then equality, race and gender, and conspiracy theories. And you can see in the two streams of information that there's definite inequalities, right? Because in the two streams of information, one message leads to death and the other message leads to life, because conspiracy theories are based on fears of race and gender, whereas the message that leads to life, parables, Eden to Eden, compare and contrast, there's equality in the race and the genders. Any questions? Did that help? I hope that helped.
Yes, thank
Yes,
you.
Much.
Very good.
Thank you.
Very good.
I was really blessed, so I hope you guys were too.
Thank you.
So if there are no questions, I'll go ahead and say the closing prayer that she said. If you kneel with me, we will close in prayer. And this is before we realize that God doesn't have gender. So she said, "Dear Father in heaven, thank you for our blessings. Thank you for how you have led this movement and the opportunity to meet at this school. I pray that you will bless these classes. May people feel comfortable and accepted, that they can speak out in their doubts, that they can question as we wrestle with these things together. May we all leave here stronger in our faith. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen." And I pray the same thing because, they've split us up into the different groups where, we're not gathering together in every single meeting, we're separated out in our own units, so that for what I understand is so we can get to know each other and feel safe. Yeah, feel safe with each other, right? And by feeling safe, if we have questions, we can speak them up, because if we don't question the things that are not helping, that we're not understanding, we might go off in the wrong direction, right? And so if you have questions, ask them. No one's going to look down. You ask your question, and then it gets explained by somebody who understands that point. Like I might understand something, whereas I don't understand something else, or somebody else can bring in that information that I don't understand. And as a group, we have our individual, because there's so much information, like she said, that we might not be, all of us be able to understand everything, but as a group, we can all bring in what we do know and help each other out. So I pray that you all feel safe and are able to ask questions, feel comfortable if you have something that you don't understand, to bring it up. Okay.
Thank
all I
you,
got.
Christine. This was very good for me. I understood a lot of it because it was a lot of recap. So
Good.
thanks. Mhm.
Yeah, these recaps have just been an incredible blessing. I'm glad you guys were here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's good if you're going to be here tomorrow too, because Donna's going to do number 2.
Awesome.
And then the Uganda number 4 is kind of separate of this study, but still connected.
Awesome. And then Elaine's going to be doing presentation number 3 on the King of the South next
Next week.
Friday.
Christine, can we get the notes for these? Can you post them?
Yeah, let me clean them up a little bit, and then because I did make a few mistakes, and I'll send them to you and Elaine, and then Elaine can post it on the website. But I'll send you a copy because I know that you post it to the SAC Fellowship. Okay,
No rush.
cool. All right. Well, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. It's a blessing to go through that process though, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
It's like
I wish-
things are really coming together, and that's, you know, this whole dispensation was, the purpose of this dispensation was for us to get this before we, you know, reach Panium.
Yes.
And we've still been slow at it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
But it is
definitely,
together.
it's been a humbling experience.
Yeah. Most definitely. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
And it was really, I think what you did with part 1 was good. Just enough in there to understand that repeating pattern.
Yeah, that's and the fact that there's the cause and the effect in the yeah, because that part wasn't there, and since since I hadn't done part 1, it just seems so important that we got that part across, because it seemed really important. So I'm glad that you guys were willing to sit through all of that. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Cool.
Okay, so let me